Well, some of you I've seen before, I think, in the Wet 110 tour. I'm just going to kind of work my way from the beginning of my career forward, because as I understand it, that's what Dave wanted me to talk about. And I think in relationship to what you guys are going through, I had a very similar path. Some of you may be a little different, but when I got out of high school, I knew I was interested in science. I didn't want to be a physicist. I didn't want to be a chemist or anything like that, but I liked science. And I was pretty good at math, and chemistry was okay, but that wasn't the whole thing I wanted. So I didn't really know what I wanted. So I went to Western Michigan University. And the reason I went there is my brother had gone there. It's about the only reason. And he had just graduated, so I didn't have him there. But when I went to Western, I went in and didn't know what I wanted. So what I did is it'd be similar to doing something here, but I took a lot of gen ed courses in different science areas, just to give me an idea of what I wanted to do. And I didn't want to waste my time, so I was trying to take the courses in areas that I could still apply toward my degree. Because as many of you know, sometimes it takes 5-6 years if you want a 4-year degree, depending on how the path is. So I was trying to be frugal in how I was handling it. So anyway, I had a class very similar to this. It was called Studies for Undecided Students. And in that class, they mostly taught us how to do research into different careers. Where to look. It's a lot different now. In those days, you still went to the library for almost everything. Didn't have the internet to speak of like you do now, and all the search engines and Google and all of those things. But anyway, it was a very good class, and it gave me some idea. But I'll tell you what really got my interest was when I went into the geology department. I had taken biology, agronomy, sociology, a bunch of different things. And when I went to the geology department, the thing I really liked about them is any one of the professors, similar to what I understand it's like here, but anyone. It didn't matter who it was. It could be the dean of the department. If I had a question as a new student, I could stop them in the hall, they'd stop and talk to me. Whereas in many of the other departments, if I asked even my own professors, sometimes they wouldn't pay any attention. So I thought, these are the kind of people I want to be around. People that care and that want to help you learn. And so that's how I got started, and I ended up in a Bachelor's of Science in Earth Science. It actually was designed, the degree was designed for someone that was either going to be a teacher or an environmental scientist. So I completed my college in the 4 years. The only thing that happened to me, and this isn't really important, but it was the thing that happened, I was supposed to be done in April, the end of the winter term. And what happened is I was advised by one of my advisors that I didn't want to take the normal non-Western world class. That was a required class. And everyone had to have it. And I said, well, I don't want to take the one that everybody takes. I'd like something that applies to my degree. So he said, well, here's a class that'll work for you. And I thought, okay, good. And I had it covered and was supposed to meet in the winter. Come to find out, it met in Guatemala. Well, I had other classes I had to take that winter, so I couldn't hardly go to Guatemala and take the class. It was good and bad. What happened is, when I found that out, all the other classes were full, so I just went ahead and added my, I guess it'd be summer semester, spring semester, whatever you want to call it, after the winter. And as you know, that's a double speed. I ended up taking 12 credits in the spring semester. One of them was a 300 level geology course, and I had a couple of others. One was the non-Western world, which was a history course, history of the modern Middle East. It was 389, I think. Anyway, I had to work my butt off, but it was worth it. It was very worth it. I was glad that I did it. I ended up coming home. 3 days later, I was getting married, because my current wife and I had been engaged, and the plan was I was going to be home for a month and a half and get married. But that's just the way things go, and that's why I tell you about it. Sometimes there's bumps in the road that you don't expect, but they can work out for the best. So I remember driving home. What am I going to do now? What am I going to do with an earth science degree? I didn't really know. And actually, at the time I came home, it was 81. We were in a similar downturn to what 2008 was like. There weren't a lot of jobs out there. I couldn't find any jobs. I ended up going to what's affectionately called a headhunter, someone that looks for a job. You know, they're hired by companies to find people, and similarly from me, I ended up getting a job in the geotechnical field. What that means is I did quality control for construction. So I did density tests on the soils, I did strength tests on foundation materials, I did density and testing on asphalt, steel, anything related to construction. It was all materials testing. I also did field inspection, which meant I made sure the contractor was following specifications for a given project. It was actually a very good job, and after earning the respect of the contractors, it was pretty enjoyable. I worked for 4 years for a company called Samtest, and then I also worked another 4 years for another company called Soil and Material Engineers. I ran the lab in both locations as well as did field work. So I was a supervisor as well as eventually, not my first year, but within a couple of years I was supervising people. But what I figured out there is I'm not going to get anywhere unless I have an engineering degree, at least not in that field. And I wasn't going to go back to school for an engineering degree, so I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And I happened to have a next door neighbor at that time who was the chief operator for the city of Bay City's drinking water plant. And he knew about my background, he knew about my work, how I handled myself, how I worked. And he said, you know, for the first time we're going to be able to hire outside of the city. And the way that used to work, it's not as prevalent anymore, but all of the union contracts required you to hire people from inside the city first if you could find someone. Well, a place like the water treatment plant, there was always somebody else in the city that wanted the job out there, and they generally had seniority, so they'd get the job. Well, what started happening is water and wastewater treatment are becoming have become, and are getting more so technically oriented. It's very technical and very difficult rules to follow. So for the first time, they had finally had a situation where they were allowed to hire from outside, and he said, give it a try. Now I'm going to tell you all, I'm going to do the same thing that he did for me, for all of you. I'm going to invite every one of you to consider water and wastewater as a career. Not to sell it to you, I want you to just go and take 1 or 2 of the courses and see what you think. I am very happy with my choice, and I'll tell you more about that as we go. But it's been challenging. I've never been bored. There's always more to learn. These facilities that we operate are basically big machines, and it takes years to understand them. Honestly, if you want to be, and you care about a career, you want a career that you can enjoy and feel like you're doing something important, this is it. People don't think about it. They turn on the faucet and it works. They flush the toilet and it goes away. They don't think about how it works, or why it works, or what it is important to them for. We cannot have our lives, we would not have the growth and the industry that we have without a good water supply. I'll tell you that partly because both the cities of Saginaw and Midland in the early 1900s had river water supplies. So that meant that when they tried to make different things, they didn't have very good water to work with. Also, General Motors was involved, but Dow and Dow Corning, all of those companies were very interested in better water. So in the 40s, after World War II, they actually had talked about it before the war, but because of the limit on materials and effort and money and things like that, they weren't able to do it till after the war. The cities went together and built a raw water pipeline. It's 65 miles long from Whitestone Point to each city. That ought to tell you right there how important water is, for them to build a pipeline 65 miles long to get good water. So anyway, back to my story. I started to work for Bay City. They had Saginaw Bay water. It was about a mile out for one intake and about 3 miles out for the other. What they called the black hole in the bay was 18 feet deep. And if you've ever been on the bay when the winds come up, it stirs up pretty quick. The other thing that can happen is if you get a northeast wind, the plume from the river can blow right over the top of the intake. So all of a sudden you go from relatively clear water to mud, and you're treating this for drinking water, right? And we were able to do it effectively. The plant was designed for it, we were able to do it, but it was difficult, just like running a river water plant is. Flint wasn't able to actually make it happen, but there are communities that treat river water every day and effectively. But anyway, I worked for Bay City for about 4 years. Seemed to be the magic number, 4 years at every location pretty much to that point. And I got an opportunity to work for the city of Midland. And the reason I took it is I had from the beginning, I wanted to be a superintendent. So I knew that I needed a broader experience than an operator. Operators run the plant, and there's nothing wrong with being an operator. In fact, you need to be an operator to move up. But I wanted a broader experience. So as a utility worker in Midland, I did that for 7 years. I was fully trained to operate the facility by myself. I was also fully trained to operate the lab in the absence of the lab manager, and I was trained in maintenance areas. So I learned a very broad application in the industry. And then I knew that I needed supervisory skills, and that was when a position came up in Saginaw. I worked for the city of Saginaw starting in 2000. I was hired as an operating foreman to get my supervisory experience. One thing I'll mention related to that is it's important to have goals for yourself. You don't always get them, they don't always matter, but it's always important to have somewhere you're trying to get so that at least you've got some direction in what you're doing. So I would encourage you to do that. Then what happened is I started for Saginaw. I worked for them for about a year. The assistant superintendent and superintendent of water in Saginaw both retired at the same time. So I ended up being assistant superintendent, and one of the other operating foremen was promoted to a superintendent. I did that, that's all on the paper there, but I think I did that for about 5 years or so. Then the person that was superintendent was promoted to deputy director. I became superintendent of water treatment. Did that for, I think, about 9 years. Effectively did that, and then a good friend of mine passed unexpectedly in the distribution and collection system. And what that means is he was the superintendent for all the piping and maintenance of all the piping that supplies water and collects sewer from the city. I was the only person that had the licensing in the city to be able to take over his job, so I ended up being superintendent of both divisions, water treatment and maintenance and service. I've done that since 2014, and as of last week, it's not official yet, but I'm acting deputy director of water and wastewater treatment services. So if you also look, there's a lot of other things on there, and I didn't do any of this to try to brag or anything else. But a lot of effort will gain you a lot of benefit. I've got awards for my service, not both in terms of time, but also in terms of the type of service I've done that I've received from my peers, not just from anybody, but people that work with me in the field. I am currently the chair of the Michigan section AWWA, which is the professional organization for all of Michigan. To tell you the truth, I got a lot on my plate right now. My wife looked at me last night and she says, "How are you doing it?" And I just told her, well, I'm just putting one foot in front of the other and keep going. Basically, you have to learn to pick priority and work on the things that are important, and the things that are less important will come to the top eventually. You just got to keep working at the things that you really have to get done. But I don't say that, again, I'm not trying to brag, but I want you all to know that if you work hard and if you care about what you do, and that's a key, think about it. How much time do you spend working if you're working full time? Even if it's just 40 hours a week, how much time do you spend at work? And I'm not saying 40 hours, I'm talking about in your daily life. Okay, let's break it down a little bit. You get up about what, 6, 7 o'clock? Get yourself cleaned up, you go to work, unless you're working afternoons or midnights or whatever it is. So get to work, work for 8 hours or more, come home, eat some dinner, and you're with your family about 3 hours and you go to bed. Much of your adult life is spent working. I don't want any of you, nor would I recommend anyone hate their job, not like what they're doing, want to do something else, waiting to get out every day. Find something you're passionate about, something you care about. Because I tell you, it's a lot better life when you care about what you do, and you go home every day and you say, I feel good about that. I feel like I did something. I bet Dave really enjoys what he does. I can tell by the smile on his face. You know, so it's easy for me to say, don't get me wrong, I've been in your seat, but I know it's easy for me to sit here and preach about it at this point in my life. But don't get discouraged. I think the other thing that I really learned, I've been a procrastinator most of my life. I can tell you that without any qualm. So what that means is I usually wait till the last minute to get anything done. Remember I told you about the end of my time at Western when I had that extra class and I had 12 hours at a double speed, so it's like a 24-hour semester? What I learned out of that was I was really hurting myself, and I don't procrastinate like I used to, and I still did it after somewhat. But what I learned out of that, though, is most of the rest of my college career, I had a mediocre college career. My grade was 2.7, my graduating grade point. Good enough to get me graduated, but not anything like I was capable of. When I took that last semester, I knew I didn't have time to fool around. I had to study and I had to keep up. So I did my homework every night and I studied religiously. Did I have much of a life? Actually, I had a better life, and I'll tell you why. When it got time to have fun, I wasn't stressing about what I didn't have done. I could actually relax and have fun. It took me all the way through college to figure that out. So I'm trying to share with you, if that's how you operate, don't do it anymore. It's not worth it. It's so much better when you got your work done and you can go relax and enjoy yourself when you're instead in the back of your mind you're thinking, God, I got that midterm and I'm not ready, or whatever it is. Or I've got a 1,200 whatever word paper that I haven't even started and it's due on Monday. Whatever. Don't do it to yourself. It's not worth it. Doesn't take that much to stay on track. All right, I don't even know how much time I've been talking. Not very long, 20 minutes, I guess. Dave, do you have something?
So, yeah, I was going to ask you about current cost opportunities within the Bay, Saginaw, or Midland plants, and also the outlying residual municipalities, I guess, all of those.
I don't know all of the data. I don't really know the data. I know that there's a large portion of people that are my age that are retiring, or are near my age. I can just think at my plant alone, probably out of the staff, a third of it is going to retire in the next few years, next couple of years. And that's not unusual. In fact, most plants and or distribution systems are the same or worse. Most of the, in fact, I just came from the leadership retreat for Michigan AWWA, and that generally consists of a lot of the administrators for different plants in the state. And we were talking about some of this, and they were all saying that they're having a hard time finding people. It absolutely is a growing field actually too, because we're adding positions due to the new regulations that are going on, as well as the positions that are going to come open from retirement.
Is that state or federal regulation?
This would be state, the state lead and copper rule. I don't know, Midland doesn't have as much of an issue with it, but Flint, Grand Rapids, GLWA, Detroit, they all have a lot of effect from that. So there are a lot of opportunities in the field for folks that are coming into it. The other thing that I'll tell you too, in terms of my experience with working in municipal work, the smaller the utility, the less the pay and the benefit generally. But that doesn't mean that it's not worth going to work for a smaller utility. Because if you go to work for them, some people love it. Some people like working for a smaller utility. A lot of times those kind of jobs involve doing water, wastewater, cemeteries, whatever. You're doing all kinds of different things. But you also have to be licensed. But the other thing that happens is it gives you good experience. Like I mentioned in some of these other jobs that I had, I got really good experience that made me qualified for other jobs that I wanted. So, you know, don't cut yourself short and not take a job that's going to give the experience you need to get a better job.
That's a good question. What is the qualifications for field operations, and what do they do like on a daily basis?
Field operations, the qualifications for that is, to be honest, you do have to be smart. Let me tell you that right out front. But you have to be the kind of person that is mechanically inclined. You have to be able to think analytically about mechanical things. But the other thing is you have to have a really strong will. Because those people that do field work, they're out there in the middle of the night repairing water lines.
So that's what they're, okay.
Yeah. Field, unless you end up in supervision, you generally start from the bottom, you know, so.
Something breaks or.
Yeah, you're in there repairing it.
Lines never break at 8 in the morning when it's sunny, right?
Well, they do, but the ones you remember are the ones that, you know, 3 in the morning, it's 30 below and you're laying in a puddle of water trying to get a main back together. I've never actually I've done some physical work, but I've never done that work, but I've seen it done, and I have great respect for the people that do it. Like I said, I would make it akin to a long distance runner, like a marathon runner. You got to have that kind of stamina to be able to do that kind of work. You know, you got to have the mental ability to do that. In the plants, you can do anything from being an operator, running the facility, to working in maintenance. Some maintenance positions do both, kind of like my utility job did. You could also, I know we have graduates out of the program that went to work for vendors. You know, you can work for somebody that does pump testing or sells treatment equipment, because it's important for anyone that works for them to understand the processes too, and understand how hydraulics work and how the treatment works and all of that. That is one thing about water and wastewater both that a lot of people don't understand, is there's a lot more to it than just the treatment of water. You also have people that handle the billing and that deal with the public on a regular basis. There's people that are engineers and chemists and all kinds of different levels of abilities and education that you can get a job with. So the reason I say that is, let's say you did go into the water treatment and wastewater treatment and you decided you wanted more, it wouldn't be that hard to get some additional training if you wanted to go further. Any other questions? I did have a PowerPoint last time I did this, but I thought it was, you guys see PowerPoints all the time. So I didn't want to throw another PowerPoint at you. And I'll also share, for those of you that have not been there, like if your class wanted to do a tour of the plant, Dave, I would arrange for that.
Oh, okay.
If they'd like to have a tour and see the facility. In fact, next time we do this, we could do it at my plant if you wanted.
Oh, that'd be fantastic.
So they get a chance to see. One of the things that people...
Pick a wet, rainy day.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a beautiful day, but anyway.
So how far can you go with just a 2-year degree from here? Does you have to go forward with a 4-year to?
It depends on the facility. There's many of our people that have been through our program that are superintendents, administrators. Ryan Goebel is from this program, and he is the Bay County superintendent for the Bay County water plant. Okay, so it really kind of depends. Right now in the city of Saginaw, and as far as I know, Midlands also, to be assistant and superintendent, you have to have a 4-year degree. So it depends. That could change too, but right now it's 4-year degree for the large systems. One of the things I'll tell you that isn't the greatest about the career, but I again thought it was worth it, was the shift work. You know, when you're operating a facility, you're there 24/7, not personally, but it's run 24/7. So there's people that operate midnights, there's people that operate afternoons, there's people that operate day shift, and that can vary. You can get shifted around a little bit. One thing I do know that's happening though is we're adding positions for that too, because it's hard on your life when you've got 4 or 5 people running a plant 24/7. And especially if somebody gets sick or injured or something like that. So we actually, in the operating foreman and the operators, we have 6 now in our schedule. So it makes it a lot easier if someone gets sick or hurt to cover without everybody having to work a lot of overtime. So the other thing I'll tell you too, the benefits are getting better again. The municipal work tends to be anywhere from 3 to 5 years behind the rest of the world. And I'm not sure why that is true, but one of the things that they did is we used to have traditional retirement, you know. Then around 2000 thereabout, they started negotiating that away for the more common 401k type of plan. In a municipality, they call it a 403b, but it's the same idea. And it's still better than many of the private, like our 401k type of plan was the employee puts in 5% and the municipality puts in 10. So you're putting 15% of your pay away every year, which is better than most. Most places it's a match up to a certain percentage, like 7% or something. So it was pretty good in that regard. But one of the things that many of them are doing now is they're going back to what's called a hybrid, which a portion of the plan is defined benefit retirement, traditional retirement, and then the excess money goes into the defined contribution, which is like the 401k type of a plan. So I'll describe that for you. So let's say we're talking 15%, right? I've got 5% I'm putting in and 10% the city puts in. We have, ours is set up with a 1.5 multiplier. The way that works is your final average. So say the last 3 years of your work times 1.5 times your years of service gives you what your income would be. So if you calculate that out, you can figure it out. But the thing I like about it is, okay, whatever that cost is comes out of that 15% to support that. And then any extra goes into the 401k type of a plan. So the thing I like about it is it gives you a much more stable income than something that's purely based on what's happening in the market. Is it foolproof? No, nothing is. Nothing's foolproof. But I feel a little more confident. I actually went to the hybrid. I had a choice whether I was going to stay with the defined contribution or go with the hybrid, and I chose the hybrid. So it's another thing that can happen to you too, just depending on what point you're in your career. Because I told you I moved around, right? Well, I had about, I don't know, maybe $10,000 from when I worked in testing. That over the years, it might be 30 now. That was retirement oriented. I've got 1, 2, 3 retirements besides that. I had, if you work for a municipality and they participate in what's called MERS, it's Michigan Employees Municipal Retirement System. It transfers. So your vesting and all of that, the time vesting carries over, and most communities do participate in it. And what happened though is when I went from one city to another, that pension was frozen. And then I went like from Bay Cities. And then when I went to Midland, that was frozen. So then when I became eligible age-wise, I could draw on that. And I've actually been doing that. Once I hit, I think it was 55. I was able to start drawing, and what I've been doing is I've been supplementing my 401. I live off the money I get out of the retirement, but I supplement out of my own income to the 401, so I'm really deferring my retirement is what I'm doing. So there's always ways to try to use your situation to your best benefit, even though I didn't stay in one place and get 30 years of service, which would have been awesome. The old plans had like anywhere from 2 to, the highest I remember hearing was 2.5 multiplier. So after you get to a certain age and years of service, you can get up to like 80% of your income in retirement, which is pretty good. But that's not available anymore for most places.
Can you talk about shift work, Paul?
What would you like to know about it?
When does that kick in? When do you gravitate away from shift work? And how long would they expect to look in that? And is that based on seniority or is that rotational? I mean, you've got experience in Bay City and you've got experience in so many different municipalities. I think you've got some perspective on that.
Well, there's some people that actually like shift work and work it for many years. I have operators that have worked midnights for 20 years. They like being on their own, not having a bunch of people around, and they like the quiet of it too. So there's certain people, and some people can handle it better than others. I worked straight midnights for a year and I never got used to it. I just didn't get used to it. I could do afternoons or days anytime, and I worked midnights fine on occasion, but it wasn't something after a year of working I thought, no, this isn't my gig. I don't want to do midnights full time. Generally what happens is when you first come in, you're low man on the totem pole, so you get whatever's available. That could be midnight, it could be afternoon, it could be days. Sometimes even that happens, but you get what's left. Everybody else gets to choose first. Generally the way these shifts work is there's well, hardly anybody does a traditional rotating shift anymore. Those are hell on you, and most places have gotten away from it. And what I mean by that, I don't remember the exact, but it's like 5 days on days, 2 days off, 6 days on afternoons, 3 days off, 6 days on midnights, 2 days off, and then you start all over again, or whatever it is. I've forgotten what the exact rotation is, but you're constantly changing, and it's really hard on you. So most facilities have gotten away from that. We have, well, they call them straight shift, but they're not really straight shift. We have 2 persons on the midnight shift, 2 persons on the day shift, and 2 persons on the afternoon shift. And then what they do is there's 1 week they'll be on relief, and the next week they're the one that's working, running the plant. Okay. When you're on relief, you do maintenance and things like that. If somebody calls in or has vacation or whatever, then you cover for the other operator. So they kind of share it. Okay. There's also, we're going to that for the foreman too, that's for the operators. The foremen currently work a different type of thing where they work 12-hour weekends, but it gives them a lot more days on the week, days off in between. And they don't work all weekends, and that's the other benefit is they get more weekends off. So they work 12-hour weekends and the rest of their shifts are 8-hour shifts. And there's one person that works primarily days, one primarily midnights, and one primarily afternoons. And then there's 2 people that are kind of what they call relief or floaters. And they usually work a couple of days and then a couple afternoons, and the other person will work a couple of days and a couple of midnights. We try not to switch all 3 around. And then ultimately what can happen is if you get someone you get a couple people off, then things change a little bit. But
Is that set annually or monthly or?
ours is set up on a 5-week rotation.
Okay.
Okay, so you go 5 weeks and then it switches and starts over. Yeah, there's things about it that are good and things about it that aren't. I remember when I worked afternoon shifts, if you don't have a family, it's perfect because you got all morning to get anything else you want done. The afternoon, you can go hang out at the plant and then get your rest at night. And then other times, of course, you do your other things. But if you got a family, afternoons doesn't work so good because they're all on a regular day shift schedule. So when you have a family, that's actually why I worked midnights for a year, because I was trying to get more time with my family. So that's also why I ended up in maintenance. I decided I didn't want to do that for 20 years. So there are options. There'll be things that'll come up that you can do other than work operations forever.
So lateral moves are pretty common.
Yeah. Yes. You can also find other facilities where they have more staff too. The other thing I'll tell you, there are places out there that still have the defined benefit retirements. Genesee County, for example, still has it. Lansing Board of Water and Light still has defined benefit retirements, as far as I know. You know, some of these bigger entities still have the better benefits.
Is there a lot of, I know because we're here at Delta, is there a lot of flexibility in the Midland Bay City and Saginaw plants? People move regularly if options open up?
We trade around, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So good people are moving up and across and around,
Yes.
circumventing difficulties.
I have 1, 2, 3, including myself, 4 people that have worked either at Bay City or Midlands facilities at my plant. So that does happen quite a bit. It just depends on your situation.
Sure, the students, you know, so they tend to see it as one opportunity, but the ability to be flexible and move is good.
Actually, it's almost necessary because in order to get the experience you need, especially if you're interested in working up, you know, if you like working operations, and some people love it, you know. You also, when you do operations, you're working on certain holidays and things like that. It's generally spread around. Not everybody gets all the holidays, but it gets spread around, so you have to do some of that. But, you know, there are licensing exams in order to run a facility like we have. You have to be able to, you take an exam for the state that proves that you have the knowledge and the capability to run the facility because you have people's health in your hands. And it is an important job. Their safety and welfare is important.
Is that a re-up every 3-4 years, or do you apply for the next level at that point?
Yes. It's, I believe it's a 3-year cycle. If you write the next level and pass it, you're all set. If you don't, if you stay at the same level, it's only, I think it's 2.8 CECs, and that's 28 hours of training that you need each 3 years. So it's not that hard to get. And that's one of the things AWWA does is we offer a lot of training to allow you to do that. We have regional meetings that are available twice a year. And if you just went to those and went to them regularly, you would be all right. And then there's other trainings as well, especially when you're first starting out. There's a lot of training available.
Does that also, is part of that experience on the plant too? How does that work? Is it all CEs or CEUs, or does that also experience in your current operating position require?
The experience part of it is what allows you to write the next level. So if you go through our program and you get through the whole thing, you're automatically approved to write the introductory level licenses. Normally it takes about a year of service in a plant to do that, 6 months to a year, depending on your other education. And then after, there's a formula. You could go online on the Michigan Eagle, the Environment, Great Lakes and Energy is what it's called now. You can go on their website and it'll show you what the formulas are for it. But it all depends. There's so much that you have to have for education. There's so much experience. In some cases, you could substitute back and forth, you know, experience for education or vice versa, depending on the situation. So anyway, it generally, I had a 4-year degree, and I think the folks with 2 years degree, it'd probably be similar, but it took me about 5 years to get to the top license. So, and I'd recommend you do that too. If you go and you move through it, don't stop. Just keep moving your way up until you're through it. And then all you have to do is maintain your CECs, or CEUs. We call them CECs. Continuing education credits. Same idea, other ones units. But any other questions?
Are we the only program in the state now? Where are we at with that?
In terms of, oh, there's 2. There's one in the UP at Beta Knock. And that is something we are working on. There's a couple things we're working on. I guess we could talk about that. One of the things we're working on is making our programs between Beta Knock and Delta more combinable, transferable. And the reason we're doing that is multiple. One is if the course doesn't go here and there's one going at Bay de Noc, you could potentially get your credits that way. We're trying to work toward making them, for the most part, as much as we can, internet available, so you could do it remotely. We're also seriously considering, it's not put together yet, but we're looking into having internships. And if we can make that happen, you would be getting paid part-time to go and get your experience. You probably wouldn't need the practicum if you had already been doing work in the plants.
So right now, there's wastewater treatment, at least in this area, there's no co-op or internships or positions that.
There might be a couple, but they're not prevalent.
Okay.
But we're actually working as a group. Those of us that are on the advisory committee, Kevin Van Sickle from Genesee County, Ryan Goebel from Bay County, Peter Schwarz and Patrick from Midland. We're all looking to add some internship, but we have to budget for it. We have to get it all going. So it'll probably take a good year or so to get it going, but that's what we're working toward, is to have internships available.
So does that fall under Eagle, or is that just all state level? Does wastewater at a city level follow this? Are they like under state regulations of the DEQ? Eagle?
Are you talking about for education?
Just in general,
Yes, in general.
You guys report to the DEQ?
We report to what's called Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. That was the DEQ.
Right.
Yeah. They both fall underneath Eagle. They're different divisions, I guess they call them. And they keep changing the name, so I can't even tell you what all it is anymore. But I report to the Saginaw Bay District office has an engineer. That's my regulator. Okay, and the wastewater also has engineers that are their regulator that they deal with. And as far as for testing and for certification and all of that, they have a operator training and certification unit that handles all of that. It's a different group. It's within the same entity, but it's a different group. So, and then there's also a panel, like the Delta program is all approved through the state. For the certification and all of that. So it's all tied in together. And that's one of the things that's good and bad about it. The bad thing is it takes a lot longer to get things changed. But the good thing is that when you're done, you've got something, you know. So, I don't know. I guess maybe I should have done the PowerPoint. I would have had more to tell you.
I think there's a lot of wet people here. I'm not sure if the waste or whatever.
I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. Oh, you too? I remember seeing you. Okay. So anyway, a bunch. That's good. I'm glad to hear that.
Coming down the pipeline.
Well, one thing I'll tell you about, some of you that are in the program, in the Wet 110 course, and I'm not sure what they do in the 112, but in 110 we hit you with most of what you're going to need. It's basically about the kind of information you need to pass an F4 and F3, which are the first 2 level licenses. I was the one that it was designed before me, but I worked on it for quite a while. And I set it up that way for a reason. One is I think that the more you're exposed to things, the more likely it'll stick. And the math and the chemistry and all that you're working on, that's the kind of stuff you're going to need to write those licenses. And so I figured if I gave it to you in the introductory and you got it again in advanced, it would be more likely for you to understand it and get it. So it's not easy though, I know that. If you have questions, don't hesitate to ask Victor. He'll take the time with you. So it's, you know, even the people in the you probably have experienced this, the people in the library that are used to helping with problems don't really understand to do the problems we do, because they don't do applied math like we do. It's they do more of the just working with the algebra itself. But the critical thinking, I guess, is what I'm getting at. you know, your negotiation through a problem where they give you 10 things and you only need 3, and you got to figure out which ones you need and how you're going to use them. So, anyway.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Anybody got a question? Sorry.
No.